Hi, welcome to the makeup class for SSW 807 Advanced Environmental Social Work. We are having this makeup because it was not to meet during the scheduled time because of reasons that I explained to the classroom. And so that we don't lose any time, let us continue with the class using this format. Okay, so let me just check. Oh, yes. I hope you'll be able to see that screen. Yes, I can see it from my end. I hope from your end it is also clear. So, in this particular lecture, we are going to look at the key scholars in environmental social work and their contribution to environmental social work. Now, um, we have been on this course for some time, and we already had the introductory uh, elements of this course. So now we are getting into um, picking up with it as we go through this marathon of the course. So let's look at those who contributed and to the material that we have now, which is very, very key, very, very important recognition of knowledge that already exists. So that when we are contributing our knowledge, particularly when you'll be doing your research for masters and perhaps you decide to focus on environmental matters within social work, so environmental social work, you'll be able to recognize particular proponents and particular scholars who have made great contribution to this very important specialization of social work. So, having said that, let's carry on. Okay. So, as we have said before, environmental social work emerged from realizing that environmental problems are also social problems. Okay, traditionally, like we said, social workers are focused on social problems, but these environmental problems are part of social problems. So we came to that realization, or it was come to that realization in building the content for environmental social work. So, because of that, factors like climate change, pollution, deforestation, drought, floods, loss of biodiversity, and environmental degradation were recognized to all affect human well being. Um, just just as social justice affects human well-being, health affects human well-being, livelihoods affect human well-being, community development issues affect well-being. So all these factors, whether environmental or social, affect human well-being. So today we're going to look at the several scholars who have played a very critical role in shaping environmental social work by providing us with the theoretical foundations, by advocating for environmental justice, and by developing practical approaches that we are using for today's interventions. So the work that they have done or they have contributed to in the past has really transformed social work as a profession, because previously the profession was concerned mainly with the um, socioeconomic and psychosocial issues. But we have now moved to the profession recognizing the interconnectedness of people and the natural environment, and we give gratitude to these proponents and these scholars. So we're going to start with Carol Germain and Alex Jitterman, and they focus on ecological systems theory and the life model. So Carol Germain and Alex Jitterman, as is known, are known to you. These are among the most influential scholars in social work, and they developed the life model of social work practice. This life model is grounded in ecological systems thinking. Okay? And you remember from your social work theory, um, systems theory. So they challenge traditional social work approaches that focus only on personal problems or problems that are social or that are only people related. And instead, they emphasize the interaction that exists between individuals and their environments, which is very, very key. So the main ideas that Jermaine and Jitterman bring in include, for example, in the life model. I'll just pull that. In the life model, they propose that human beings and environments continuously influence each other. So there's a relationship. Again, in this life model, okay, so the interaction of the various aspects within life, okay, the existences within a life space, they all influence each other. Secondly, they propose that, or the life model proposes that problems arise when there is a poor fit between people and the environment. So the relationship between people and the environment begins to have challenges. So problems arise. So the friendship or the friendliness of the relationship is reduced or is disrupted. Okay, then problems begin to arise. And explanation of matters using relationships is very key or very oftenly used in social work, because in social work one of our values is the value of human relationships. So understanding relationships really has been one of our strengths in being able to solve problems or problem solve. Again, this life model proposes that social workers should focus on improving both individuals and environmental conditions. So you look at both when you're looking at the relationships for you to be able to have success, because human beings live in the environment. Okay, the environment surrounds the human beings, so it's very important to maintain a good relationship between the two. It's kind of obvious, huh? So you wonder how why we took so long to be able to include that in our problem solving. Okay, now of course we didn't take long. There were tandems. There are aspects of infusion of the environment into our problem solving, but now clearly we have brought in that natural environment aspects, which was majorly left out but still considered. Okay, so I'm referring to the consideration as regards to what we talked about in the previous class, the history of environmental social work, and we even touched on the history going back 100 years during Jane Addams, as a proponent to Jane Addams' time. So in this particular session, we are bringing in the most recent proponents who are actually focusing on particularly ecological matter. Okay, so Jermaine et al. Focus on the concept of person in environment. Now, this is again not green to you. So, the person in environment perspective, okay, how does it perceive the relationships in the environment? This suggests that social workers cannot understand individuals without examining the environments in which they live. Okay. Now, the environments in which human beings live include the family, of course. Traditionally, as social workers, we appreciate that. The community, traditionally, again, as social workers, we appreciate that. But now we also bring in the um, um, physical and natural environments. And then traditionally, we of course have the economic environments and the political environments. So the psychosocial environments have been there, considered before, but now I'll just highlight that. You'll find that the physical and natural environments are environments that now we clearly consider in intervention. Let's look at their contribution to environmental social work. So they laid the foundation for environmental social work. by helping practitioners understand that environmental conditions directly affect human well-being. So ecological conditions directly affect human well-being. Let's look at some examples. For example, we have residents of Budalangi who suffer recurrent flooding. Okay, let me just check. Okay, so we have residents of Budalangi who suffer recurrent flooding. Now, traditional social work would focus on assisting the affected families, but the ecological approach goes further by examining climate change within Budalangi, river management around Budalangi, settlement patterns around the river beds, and the policies of government that are pro environmental protection or against environmental protection. And we have talked in previous classes about the laws that guide environmental justice and environmental work within our country and internationally. Another example that we have here are communities who are affected by hurricanes in the US. Now, these communities would require not just counseling or psychosocial support, but they would also require environmental reconstruction and disaster preparedness for the future. Okay. So, in terms of criticism of these particular contribution by these proponents, some scholars argue that the ecological systems theory initially paid insufficient attention to environmental destruction and climate change. So, yes, systems theory, which we have been using, particularly in social work, we would traditionally refer to the social environment. And so this criticism is very key because now it brings about the neglect we had for the consideration of um, environmental destruction, climate change, and other aspects. However, this theory remains one of the most influential theories in environmental social work. Let's look at another contributor, Michael Ungar. And Michael Ungar brought in the concept of resilience and environmental adaptation, very, very key when dealing with matters environment. Let's look at some background. Now, Michael Lungar is internationally recognized for his work on resilience. Resilience is very key in the study of environmental social work and environmental matters. And he studies how individuals, families, and communities adapt to adversity. So he studies how social work traditional clientele adapt to adversity. And his work is particularly relevant in the era of climate change and environmental disasters, such as this era. We now see for ourselves the effects of climate change. We see these effects on a day-to-day basis. It's not like it used to be some years back when it sounded more theoretical. So the main ideas that Ungar brings are, he argues that resilience is not simply an individual trait. So he's trying to say that it is not hereditary, or it is not, it could be, but it's not just that. uh, he says that resilience depends to access to social support systems. So, for example, the family and community fiber. He says that resilience depends on community resources. So, communities who are financially better off would be more resilient. He says resilience depends on education, on economic opportunities, and on environmental resources. Very, very important here. The extent to which the environment is strong or wealthy enough to safeguard itself, to be resilient. Let's look at this contribution to environmental social work. So Ungar's work helps us as social workers understand how communities recover from environmental shocks. And let's look at some examples. We have, for example, pastoral communities who frequently experience drought, Now, if you want to build resilience among them, some of the interventions we use would include diversifying their livelihood so that they're not depending just on livestock, harvesting water to cater for times of drought, ensuring livestock. After all, stock, livestock, these are investments, financial muscle. And so, providing insurance for the same would be very, very key to building resilience for this community. And then using community support networks, which majorly exist within communities. So taking advantage of those support networks within the community. Another example we can give from flood-prone communities along, for example, River Nzoia. These often place repeated displacement due to the rise in water levels around the river or within the river at around it. And we can help strengthen resilience through preparing the community. So having community preparedness plans and having drills on how to operate when disasters occur, carrying out training and disaster education, and making use of early warning systems like meteorological information. So the significance of Ungar's uh, studies, Ungar shifted the focus from merely addressing environmental damage, okay, waiting for disasters to occur, and the focus was shifted to strengthening the ability of people and communities to adapt and thrive despite challenges. So, in other words, challenges will be there, but strengthening communities to be able to adapt when actually challenges occur. Okay. Then we have Lena Dominelli. Lena Dominelli brought in the concept, or uh, she coined the term green social work. And it is said that perhaps no scholar has contributed more directly to environmental social work than Lena Dominelli. She is widely recognized as the founder of Green Social Work, and her work emerged from concerns about climate change, environmental injustice, global inequality, and disaster vulnerability. Her main ideas, Dominelli argues that environmental problems disproportionately affect poor and marginalized populations. So, therefore, as we have said in earlier lectures, she emphasizes environmental justice, which focuses on this disproportionate, effect of the environment when disasters occur. So, again, she brings about issues of human rights, climate justice, and sustainable development. We have unpacked these in depth in previous classes. Now, green social work seeks to protect the ecosystems, to promote environmental justice, to address climate change impacts, and to reduce vulnerability to disasters. So, therefore, in terms of her contribution, Dominelli transformed environmental social work into a global movement, and therefore she advocated that social workers should become environmental advocates, climate justice activists, disaster response practitioners, and policy influencers. And you can see how global this becomes because, like we said in previous lectures, the environment is one, but the effects go around to hit on all of us within the globe. Let's look at an example in regards to green social work. Example one is deforestation in Mao Forest. So the destruction of the Mao Forest would affect water availability within the country, would affect agriculture, therefore, because of water availability and other factors, biodiversity, obviously, because biodiversity is threatened as the forests are depleted, and community livelihoods. Communities survive on these natural resources. And so green social workers in this case would advocate for sustainable forest management, um, for example, pruning, like when people want firewood or need firewood, there's no need to actually fell down a whole tree, but certain branches of trees, old trees, can be pruned, to be able to bring about a symbiosis in relationship, especially in cases where the tree benefits from such pruning. Um, Again, green social workers would advocate for community participation, okay, in environmental protection, not just living um, preservation to NGOs or government or similar bodies, but having communities at the forefront. And also, green social workers would advocate for environmental restoration, so where there has been degradation. Another example we have under green social work is informal settlements in Nairobi. So, climate related flooding disproportionately affects low income residents, and Dominelli's framework encourages social workers to challenge policies that expose vulnerable populations to environmental risks. So in this case, we are focusing on policy. So in terms of her influence on policy, her work has influenced environmental decisions within the International Federation of Social Workers, International Association of Schools of Social Work, the UN, and others. Then we move on to other scholars like Mel Gray, John Coates, and Tiani Hetherington, and they focus on eco-social work. Let's look at the background of eco-social work. Now, these social workers or these scholars expanded environmental social work by incorporating ecological ethics, okay, ethics within the natural environment, and indigenous knowledge, knowledge that the local people have about their environment and how to preserve their environment. And this work is commonly referred to as eco social work. So, this combination of ecological ethics and indigenous knowledge in the preservation of the environment. The main ideas in this eco-social work is they argue that modern society often views humans as separate from nature, and therefore, eco social work rejects this view and promotes harmony between people and nature. It also promotes environmental stewardship, sustainable living, and indigenous ecological knowledge. So, in terms of contribution, they emphasize the importance of learning from indigenous communities, very important, that have long practiced sustainable environmental management. So, these communities actually know how to preserve the environment and have a lot of have wealth in knowledge in terms of the preservation of their natural environment. So instead of reinventing the wheel, it is just a matter of borrowing the same knowledge and applying it or reaffirming it within that same environment. For example, example one, many traditional African communities protected sacred forests and water sources through cultural norms. For example, the Kaya forests among the Mijikenda in Kenya, the sacred groves in Ghana, and indigenous land management systems in Southern Africa, like, for example, community based natural resource management of the wildlife, among so many other examples. So, these traditional practices promote conservation and used to promote conservation before modern environmental laws existed. What is the significance of their work? Their work has encouraged us as social workers to respect indigenous knowledge, to promote environmental ethics, and to support sustainable community development. Okay, so let's move on to Susan Kemp. Susan Kemp brings in place based social work. And Susan Kemp argues that geographic location matters greatly in understanding social problems. Location, location, location. So, what are her main ideas? She says that different communities experience environmental challenges differently. Okay, so for example, urban communities may face pollution, rural communities may face drought, coastal communities may face sea rise levels. Therefore, interventions should be tailored to local conditions. And what did she contribute? She developed frameworks that emphasize one, community participation, okay, with emphasis in the local environment. So communities should actively participate in environmental planning, in resource management, and in disaster preparedness. So community participation is very key here. Her framework also emphasized on local knowledge. So she says that local people often possess valuable environmental knowledge. Um, and then she also emphasized on context specific solutions. She says that one environmental intervention may not work everywhere. So the blanket rule does not apply for her. So let's look at some examples. For example, in Turkana County, interventions may focus on drought management, water security, and livelihood diversification. Example two, in Kakamega County, interventions may focus on forest conservation, being near the forest, soil erosion control, and sustainable agriculture, being a green area. So the needs of the two counties differ significantly. This illustrates Kemp's argument that place matters. Okay, let's just compare these on a table. You can go through these. I'll just put the scholars on one side of the table, and then the major concepts that they bring in the middle of the table, and then their main contribution at the far right of the table. So you can just use this when you're short of time, just to scan through. Now, how have these scholars shaped environmental social work? One, they have expanded the scope of social work. Okay, so the social work now includes environmental matters. So social work is no longer confined to counseling, case management, welfare services, and others. It now actually includes climate action, environmental advocacy, disaster risk reduction, sustainability initiatives, among others. Two, they have also influenced social work education. In universities worldwide now teach climate change, environmental justice, disaster management, sustainable development, among other topics that we go through during this entire course. So we have expanded our curricula. Some of us who are teaching in this area have also went ahead and specialized, got specializations in disaster management and sustainable development in order to be able to enrich these aspects of social work from an informed point of view. Again, these proponents or these scholars have influenced policy development. Um, their work contributes to international frameworks such as the Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, Sustainable Development Goals, and others. Furthermore, they have also strengthened environmental justice practically. So these scholars demonstrated that environmental degradation often affects vulnerable populations more severely than wealthy populations. And we have talked about this in regards to sustainable development. The importance of having economics in sustainable development, strong economics or a strong economic base. So environmental social workers therefore advocate for equity, for inclusion, for human rights, for climate justice, among others. So in conclusion, the development of environmental social work was much to the pioneering contributions of Carol Germain, Alex Jitterman, Michael Ungar, Lena Dominelli, Mel Gray, John Curtis, Tiani Hetherington, Susan Kemp, and others. Okay, so I've not mentioned everyone, but this gives us an outlook of the scholars. Now, their scholarship has broadened the profession's understanding of the relationship between people and the environment, therefore moving social work beyond traditional helping roles toward environmental stewardship, climate action, sustainability, resilience building, and environmental justice. And their ideas continue to guide social workers worldwide as they address some of the most pressing environmental challenges facing humanity in the 21st century. Wow. I've put for you some discussion questions which you can use to jog your mind. And you can go through these individually or in groups. Okay? So that ends our makeup class for the session that we missed previously. And so hopefully we'll be able to carry on with our normal classes as scheduled. Okay, great. Please reach out to me in the event you need any support. Cheers.